see, one of the things that's important to understand is that unless and until you are consistently awake, and what do I mean by that? What do I mean by that? If I say until you are awake, what do I mean by that? What's awake mean? Yeah, see, now you're getting closer because it's a matter of identity. It's not a matter of what you're doing, it's about who you're being. It's about who you're being. If you're being the awareness, then as the awareness, you can be aware of what's happening so that when what's happening goes into unworkability, you'll notice, like that, right? You'll be aware of what's happening. So, and here's the deal. And I say this to do violence to personalities, right? That until you are consistently awake, and until you are consistently not in your head, until you are consistently experiencing what's actually happening, not what you think or how you feel, right, but what's actually happening, until then, you cannot act in your own best interest. I say that to motivate you, because if you believe that, if you believe what I'm saying, and you should believe it because it's the truth, then you will want to meditate, you will want to have a meditation practice so you can be awake more, so you can be aware of your life more, so you can be there for what's happening in your life so that you can see when it goes off the rails. And trust me, it's off the rails a lot. For people who aren't awake, their life is an off the rails life, right? For people who aren't awake, being on the rails is what they're trying to do. Not get on, no, they're trying to get on the rails, not. But if you're awake, then you start to experience and start to be aware of being off the rails. What do I mean by being off the rails? Being in detriment, being a detriment, that's being off the rails. If you eat more than your body needs, that's being in detriment. You're hurting your body. You're poisoning your body. Too much food becomes toxic, doesn't it? So why poison your body instead of enjoy a meal? Why do that? That's crazy, right? That's what I mean by off the rails. So if it's Thanksgiving and you can see that your mind is getting ready to go off the rails, it's getting ready for the second piece of cake, it's getting ready for the next platter of food, right? That you can watch it instead of be it. You can watch it instead of be it. And if you can watch it instead of be it, then it means you then can experience being satisfied by not doing anything because you've already had enough. Yeah. See, when you're really pissed off, you're not seeing the anger, you're being the anger, right? Yeah. If you could see the anger, then it would be possible for you not to say what you were about to say. If you're awake and somebody that you're involved with and you're sharing your life with isn't awake, right? They'll start to wake up around you because you won't play the game. You won't play the stupid game anymore. You know, you won't allow upset to determine what you do. You won't fight anymore. You won't be willing to fight. You won't be willing to be in conflict because you'll be experiencing through the practice a state of being in which there is no conflict. There's just no conflict. And no matter what happens, there's still no conflict because you can be with anything. That's the whole point of this. You can be with anything. Your true nature, the awareness that is your true nature, can be with anything, right? And if you give this practice a chance, if you do this meditation practice every single day, and if you study these teachings, if you take on a stand for being the truth, if you take on a stand for being what you actually are, then you can set yourself up to discover that it is true that the truth will set you free. It is true that the truth will set you free. Because if you start to practice these practices down the road, eventually you'll start noticing that you are able to be with things that would otherwise be disturbing, but they're not. You know, you could start with little things like the traffic or the weather, right? They're the things that people get upset about as if the upset makes some kind of a difference, right? You can start with the low-hanging fruit, you know, the little things that annoy you, right? The little things that you can't tolerate, right? Start paying attention to that, right? And notice that it's not bothering you anymore. Something that bothered you isn't bothering you anymore, right? And if you continue to do the practice, what will happen naturally there will be an ever-expanding space of freedom, an ever-expanding space of satisfaction, an ever-expanding space of stillness and quiet and well-being that is available at all times. It's available at all times. And so this becomes a consistent experience that you're having, because if you do the formal practice and you get good enough at meditation where you could go into that place, where you could drop into that place, right? Then you can start to do the informal practice, which is practicing resting as the awareness for brief moments as often as possible. And if you rest as awareness, and we don't do the informal practice in the beginning because it's a waste of time, you can't do that. You've got to be able to maintain attention consistently in order to do the informal practice. But once you are able to maintain attention consistently through the formal practice, then you can start doing the informal practice. And if you do the informal practice consistently, it will involve your being awake enough to remember to do it. So you got to do the formal practice to be awake enough to remember to do the informal practice. But if you're awake enough to remember to do the informal practice and you are resting as awareness as often as you remember to do it for brief moments, that will take on a life of its own and start to open up. That will start to open up. So first it'll be brief moments, right? Then you'll notice it's maybe 5 minutes. Then you'll notice maybe 10 minutes. Then you'll notice it's like a half an hour when you're still aware of being aware. That's what I mean. That you're aware of being aware, right? That'll last for a half hour. Then it'll last for an hour. Then it'll last for a week that you're aware of being aware, right? And eventually it'll get to the point where practicing makes no sense. Because I know I'm aware, and I know I'm aware all the time, there's nothing to practice. And that will happen. If you do it, that will happen. And once you get to that point, right, you can be as unmoved and unperturbed and undisturbed and unbothered by anything that happens, like politics, like your relationships with your family. When you're awake, you can laugh at how human beings are crazy. They're crazy. They're crazy. They're upset machines. Human beings are upset machines. You get up in the morning, and what you're interested in during the day is avoiding having upsets, isn't it? You're either pursuing being happy or avoiding having an upset, right? And what's the definition of an upset? Definition of an upset is I had an expectation that things would be a certain way, and they weren't that way, and I was upset. That's what an upset is, right? Unfulfilled expectations. If you're upset, anytime you're upset, look at it and you'll see that's there. You expected it to be different and it's not, right? And so you're upset. The only other way a upset occurs is through thwarted intentions. Either thwarted intentions or unfulfilled expectations, right? I intended my day to go like this and it didn't, I'm upset. I expected, right, to get this much money back on my income taxes and I didn't, and now I'm upset. This is happening all day long in little ways and big ways, isn't it? Right? Little ways. You get up in the morning, if you look out the window and it's raining, upset number one. Right? You don't do it that way, but the fact that it's raining has an effect on you, doesn't it? And then you turn on the radio on the weather report. It's a miserable day today. They literally, the collective personality speaks that way on television and on the radio. Right? It talks about the weather the way your mind relates to the weather, right? The way your mind relates to the weather is if it's raining, that's not good. If it's sunny, that's good, but only if it's not too hot. You see what I'm saying? So your okayness when it comes to the weather exists in a very small place, a very small band of okay, right? If it's not in that band when you wake up, well, okay, I got that against me now. Then you turn on the radio and they confirm it is a miserable day because it's raining, right? And then you start your day in misery. So this is a typical existence of a human life. And what we're talking about here is that it is possible for you to experience yourself as the awareness of that life instead of the person that's living that life. And when you experience yourself as the awareness of that life, you're experiencing reality. You're experiencing the truth. You're experiencing what you actually are as awareness. Until you experience yourself as that awareness, you're experiencing who you believe yourself to be, aren't you? You're experiencing who you think you are, aren't you? You're experiencing who they told you you were when you were 2 years old, and you've been practicing that ever since and still haven't gotten any good at it. Right? You're still not very good at being who you think you are, right? Well, the problem with that is that it's a mistake from the beginning. And you can never be any good at who you think you are, because who you think you are doesn't exist outside of your mind. Doesn't exist outside of your mind. And life doesn't occur outside of your mind. This is one of the things that David Radin has been trying to get across recently, you know. If you want to practice being awake, practice paying attention to the activity of your mind. That's where all the upsets happen. And they're not being caused by out there, they're being caused by the mind itself. It's not what's happening, it's your interpretation of it that's upsetting you, isn't it? Yeah, because the same thing could happen to me and it doesn't bother me, right? So it can't be what's happening, it's got to be your interpretation of it. And your interpretation of what's happening happens in the mind. Therefore, if you're awake, you get to begin to pay attention to the mind, right? You watch the mind, and when it gets upset, right, you're not upset. When it goes off the rails, you're not off the rails. You're just watching it go off the rails. And when you get to that place, you no longer express the insanity. You stop expressing what the voice in your head is saying. So the voice in your head says it's a shitty day. You don't go to your neighbor and say, oh, isn't it a shitty day? You keep it to yourself because you know that your mind is expressing its own sickness. Mm-hmm. A sick mind has no effect on you when you're experiencing your true nature, because you're not the mind. Sick mind has no effect on you when you're experiencing your true nature, because you're not the mind. And when it's anxious, if you're aware of the anxiety, you're not anxious. When people come to me that have panic attacks, what I recommend that they do is have them. Have them. Stop. As soon as you begin to notice that your heart's palpitating and the thought arises in your mind, oh my God, am I having a heart attack or is this a panic attack? Right? Just be the awareness of all that and you're out.
What you resist persists.
Yeah, what you resist persists. Don't fight with it. If you're the awareness of what's happening, you're out. You're out of what it can't happen to you now, because you're the awareness of it instead of the person it's happening to. Look, if you're going to be in this world, there's going to be physical pain. Get over it. There's going to be physical pain, right? So that's inevitable, just like death and sickness, right? So get over it. Just be aware that that's the case. It comes with the package. It's a package deal, right? It's a temporary situation. It won't last that long. Don't worry about it. It'll end soon, especially if you're as old as we are.